My name is David Hanna. I'm here to present 20 Power Query magic tips and tricks that every user should know. Before I delve into the topic and also the 20 Power Query tricks that we should delve into, just where is Denmark, where I'm from actually. And of course I created this Power BI report, a shake map. So let's just focus in on Europe and let's zoom into Denmark here as well. And I'm actually born and raised up in the small blue island, the Sunshine Island, Bornholm to the right, but in the middle of Jutland right now. So I'm a senior advisor in data storytelling at a consultancy house named Ture. Been a consultant for the past 10 years and started with Excel and PowerPoint and too many manual processes and quickly dived into Power Query, Power BI, and more into semantic model development with Tableau Editor as well. As I've been a consultant for the past 10 years, I have been sitting close to helping the companies with their business and the impact, but also next to colleagues with hardcore programmers with Python or T-SQL and data warehousing. And what I'm really passionate about is being that sweet spot in the middle on trying to guide the business, but also sometimes be building the bridge between IT and the business as well. And I'm really passionate about guiding self-service Power BI developers to really understand some of the more enterprise-heavy concepts, but in a very practical way. And if you have seen me post recently on LinkedIn, it's very much about how can we use DAX scripts to easily get the impact we need in reports, or how should we do with documentation and maintenance of bookmarks, a feature I both love and hate, and really difficult to scale and maintain, something like that. So talking about Power Query is something I'm really excited about because I see too many manual processes in Excel still today. But first of all, let's check if your emojis and reactions work. So if you have created a Dataflow Gen 2 or a Dataflow Gen 2 in Fabric, please send a heart and let's see. Okay, a couple of hearts. All right. And how many would prefer T-SQL or Python over Power Query? If you prefer T-SQL, give a thumbs up. A few. So, and again, as always, reduce maximum data transformation if it's possible to move left or shift left. But not that many are that with Power Query. So just getting my audience. Cool. So what I'm going to talk about today is briefly a happy birthday, and then the overwhelming with options of the UI of Power Query. And then we're going to try to get some help from Microsoft with the sample data. And most likely there's something we need to do with that sample data. Thank you for that, Microsoft. And then we're going to have a lot of live demos as well to have a brief quick through of all these 20 tips, but also moving from Power Query to Dataflow Gen 1 to Dataflow Gen 2. So I hope you're ready for a bit fast-paced and live demo-filled session here. So overall, the 20 tips is summarized here as well, and I'm gonna deep dive into it. And as you know, the session is being recorded, but I also have a GitHub as well where I have these slides available, and also written a few articles on LinkedIn where you can also go deep dive into step by step for some of these tricks as well. So a happy birthday, Data Explorer, because that was actually the name before Power Query went general available in 6th of July 2013. So look at that screenshot in Excel 2010. That is something. And that is, I would say, the best kept secret in Excel is Power Query. I know too many still are not knowing the feature of Power Query inside Excel. I wish they would start there. And then you could use pivot tables and all that in Excel, and maybe move into Power BI for a bit more aesthetic, beautiful reports. But it's quite overwhelming with a lot of ribbons and icons and clicks on there, even though it's helpful to start with, that we're not going to write any of this M. But really what I love is this recipe of instructions with consistent output. That is something that is well documented and maintained compared to an Excel sheet where you actually don't know what is going on with this one, what is hidden of manual steps and processes. And I'm a father for 3, and I have 2 kids going to school. And the number of instructions and reminders I need to tell them when they come home from school, please empty your school bag with the lunchbox. Please do that. But I must say, that's also the joy of being a parent, most likely, is that is not that easy for them. So the result is really inconsistent. So thankfully, I can use more of my discipline on remembering to do that with the children. Whereas in Power Query, that is the dream that I can have one set of instructions with a consistent output. Of course, there are some moderations there and nuances that we're going to see in one of the tricks later on with, for example, changed type or removing a column. So thankfully, we have Microsoft to assist us. So inside Power BI Desktop, we can just simply click the Use Sample Data. So we'll trust Microsoft. They will assist us in learning us best practices. However, welcome to one big table. Well, it's only 700 rows, and you're on 2013 or 2014 or like that, but still one big table, every column inside one table. So this session is also that star schema all the things and learn some tips and tricks along the way. So let's dive into Power BI Desktop and also Power Query. So wonderful Power Query where we have the financials. And what I would like to do is taking this as my, you could say, staging table. So we could either duplicate or reference, but I would prefer reference, so it's always pointing to this financials. And what I would do is actually begin to prepare dimensions and fact tables. So I'm a date, I have my country, and I have my segments. And then I will have my fact table. I will call this finance transactions. And then I would then say this should not be loaded inside Power BI Desktop, only these 4 tables. And I can see here in the view, in the query dependencies, that I now are working with this local Excel file into the financials, and there are reference to these 4 tables directly to this one as well. So if anything changes here, it will then affect all the underlying tables here as well. A bit like when you have SQL with tables and views and something like that. But of course, we need to look on removing some of these columns because not every column is relevant for this date table, only some of them. And there are multiple ways of removing these columns. And often what I see is trying to multi-select all these columns and then just clicking delete or right click and say remove columns. If I do this, I will say remove columns, and that is what I would like. But this is actually not the best way. What I would recommend is we always need to try to get the small gear icon for each step, because that will be easier to actually then switch the logic instead of trying to then go inside the M code here and change the logic. So instead, I would recommend go to Home, choose Columns. Then we get a small list of all the columns in the table. We have it here. Then I will start to deselect everything and then select I only need these 4 columns. Now I have the results, which I could have been with several approaches. But look at this small gear icon that I got using this. I can then click here, where I can easily choose the columns I need. So I'll do this for country here as well. And I can see there's a tip on going to a specific column. That is exactly this one. If you have a table with 140 columns, it's easy to find that. That's true. Segment, product, discount bands. And finance transaction will be for that. All right, so a really important thing for dimensions is that we have no duplicates on our key. So what we could do to make sure to have everything selected is actually that we click on the small table icon here, which will have some features for the entire table, where you can then say remove duplicates. And then we can see, thank you for that, we actually only have a few days and not all the days in the months and years that we are working with. And as well for the country, remove duplicates. So we only have 5 unique countries. And as well for the segment here, remove duplicates. Perfect. So now we are beginning to prepare here. We'd like to begin to prepare how can we actually build relationships between our dimensions, but also our fact table. And we could definitely use the country name here, but I don't recommend using text as columns for relationships between tables. So what I would do is actually add an index column. So like a surrogate key, so just a number that represents the uniqueness of this. And I will call this country key. There we go. And as well for the segments. Call this segment key. And date will just be for now. We can use this one. We could also create one with integer, but I'll leave it for that. But with the finance transactions here, we would need to merge these new columns that we have created into this fact table. So we need to go in here and say merge queries. And then I would need to select country and then find the table of country, and the key between these are country to country, a match of all the rows. Clicking OK. And then I have this Apple airport icon I click to expand this table that I merged onto. And I would like to only have the country key. And now I have added the country key. I can then actually go in and remove that country with the text, because now I have merged the country key onto my fact table, which I can use in my semantic bottle to create relationships. I'll do the same thing here with merging queries on the other ones as well. So that is then the segments. The issue here with segments is that it's actually the combination of these 3 columns that actually makes it unique. So we could try to concatenate or something like that. But what we actually can do is holding Control key down for then multi-select. I would like to make a composite key merge. So here you can see in that order, 1, 2, 3. That is then the 1, 2, 3 here as well. And then we have a unique match on all the 3 columns combined. And then again, I would then say I would only like to have the segment key available on my fact table. And let's go in and choose some columns to be removed. Segment, product, discount bands. I'll also remove month number, month name, and year. And there we go. So now I have 11 columns on this fact table, and I have created these surrogate keys here as well on my fact table to be created with integers and also a bit more robust because we know that especially employees, products can change their name. And if you have created a key on the name, that can change. That can be sometimes difficult with historic data here as well. All right. That was some of the tricks here. And let's go further. All right. The next one is all the steps that I do here. Well, the instruction list that I'm really passionate about is actually like, if you are into DAX, it's like creating variables in DAX with the var and return, where here it's in the let and in. So each of these steps is actually like a variable, but it's a bit easier to see all the results here in Power Query compared to DAX, which can only return run results, unless you, for example, have tabulator 3 with a DAX debugger, where you can see all the intermediate results of the variables. But in the advanced editor for that, we can see that each of these steps extract the var and return. But looking here in the advanced editor as well, we have all these steps, and we have a lot of red text. And my fifth tip or trick here is that the red text will break you at some point. That definitely happened for a lot of times in projects for me. If you haven't experienced that, fair enough. But red text most likely will break you. And what do you mean about that? So let's say, for example, in the financials, let's say I don't care about this discount band anymore. Let's just remove it. That shouldn't hurt anything. But as I have created these references and going with the discount band, which is part of my segments, I can now see that the column discount band of the table wasn't found. Most likely you have seen this type of error message before. So how to fix this is go to error, because in the removed other columns, it is now hard-coded in here in the M scripts that I need to remove this column, but as it is not found, it will cause an error. So you need to then manually go in here and remove it, and then it will work. But that is tiring. So I'll just keep back in here and show you a trick that I learned watching a Power Query battle between Shandeep and Mark and Melissa Decord. So there's actually more functions to the Power Query language here that is not available through the UI. And one I think is very helpful is whenever having these sort of issues, well, what we can do is actually inserting a function or parameter that is naming missing fields dot ignore, which will actually do that if there is a missing column here, it will ignore it. So right now, what wasn't working before is now working due to this missing field ignore. So we can actually add that into the query. But most likely you have some expectancy that you would need this column and have built something in your Power BI report using that column, for example. So what I would actually more likely prefer is actually missing field.use null. So now we can actually see this discount band is actually added, but as it has been removed, we don't have any values, but we have it inside the table schema in some way. And now there is a new type of data type with question type here, or question mark. But now we actually have some more robust or error handling, even though, you know, sometimes if you're doing SQL, most likely you will have some control of it. But in self-service solutions, this quite often happens. So the missing field.ignore or missing field.use null is actually something we could utilize. I will just remove this as well. And it worked. Great. All right. And if there are any questions related to anything to it, then you can also just interrupt and say if there's anything.
Just one of the questions what was the benefit of merging the tables and keeping the key column instead of the text? And as Pavel and Yuvi said, the text can change, the keys don't.
Yeah. Also, another is you will not see this in tables of 700 rows or even 10,000 rows or something, but actually the storage is only one character or two characters with the numbers, where text can be many characters long. So there is also something about that.
It depends on the size of your data, doesn't it? And also, if you're a data person, a database person, then the integer speaks to you. But if you're just starting to use Power Query, then it might be that's the next stage for you once you carry on with your development.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Pablo just said he's found the missing field .star confusing. It does work, but sometimes it can, sometimes it's good to know if there is an issue when it breaks, rather than sort of it's that how you account for it. But the brilliant thing is that there are so many different options, aren't there? So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see a bit about that as well, with some error handling as well, where we actually have some different output destinations as well. But it is a decision you need to make. Would you like it to fail, or would you like to have something 80% moving forward?
Yeah. Well, like David, from my point of view, is that because all of our stuff's coming from SQL views, I want it to break for my purposes, because then at least I know they've messed something up. Our SQL developers have done something in the SQL database. So I actually want it to break. I don't want it to carry on going through, because then we'll never know if the data is all blank in these fields. Yeah. So that's my personal preference.
Yeah. And Fernando's put a good point in that, adding the index breaks the fold. But again, it all comes back to there are so many different ways and places and methods of which we get our data. So,
Well, I can always say now that you will already break the fold as I'm using Excel. You're not able to use query folding with Excel. You need SQL database. So surprise.
That's very, very true. That's very
true. So that's also one of my tricks later on. So how can we check query folding? Excel don't have a query native language. So all right.
But we'll let you carry on.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I assume as well that you have deactivated auto date time in your Power BI desktop settings as well. No need to tell you about that. But there is actually also an option if you're working with unstructured sources, not SQL, unstructured sources as Excel or CSV or something like that. You actually have an option in global settings to never detect column types and headers for unstructured sources that you would like to control it yourself. Or you will need some auto detection to help you from Microsoft side. And that can sometimes be annoying, adding this change type step every time. And now you can actually have some control of it as well. So just a small tip here as well. So thankful we can trust Microsoft that I want to import the Excel data, but we shouldn't actually use the Excel connector. When connecting to Excel, we should use the web. So how can we do that? And I will add some budget data that we're also going to look at. So I'll open this up. And normally, when we use the Excel connector, it will use the local path of that file. I need to go inside info, and then there is this copy path and copy local path. I need to take the copy path, expecting that you have this file on OneDrive. So new source, and then into web, and then copy paste that in, and a strange URL, and you just need to remove this question mark web equal to 1. And then
nuts, isn't it? That we still have to do that.
I'm so crazy about this because why I'm doing this is because I would like to schedule refresh, and I would like to have someone to work with me on this report, but it's difficult to share this report or Excel that is on my local machine, even though we have access to the same team site or OneDrive. And even it's OneDrive, and under the hood it's a SharePoint, so it's causes a lot of confusion, I would say. So this is my budget. Thanks for that. And we can see here in the source that it is connecting web content to the group and something like that. Whereas in the financials, in the source, we have pointing to OneDrive, but it's on my local PC. So, but now we have this budget. And I would like to do something with budget, and you most likely already can see what we need to be done here. Use first row as headers. It's a button I do like. And of course, you know that we need to unpivot these other columns. So we have all the column headers as one down in the attribute, which is now my dates, and then my value here, which was all my sales before, which is now my budget revenue. And of course, in Excel, there was this full year. Let's just go inside here and choose the columns. Insert step, fair enough. That will most likely break as well. Let's just do it over here. Sorry about this. Full year. That's a way of adding double budgets, but let's not do that. So this would then be easy to say, okay, this is text. Let's just switch this to date type so we can have a relationship to my date dimension. But still an issue here in 2025, working with different locale settings. So this Excel workbook is set to Danish, but my Power Query and Power BI Desktop is set to, on our entire computer is set to English. So this will cause an error because we're not agreeing on how the months and day and weeks and something like that should work properly. And I've seen many search replace or try to do many stupid things and been there myself. A really, really cool function you can do instead is, instead of using just the dates, you have this small tip here on using locale. And using the locale will then open up. And the data type I'll then set to dates. And now I can say, it is expecting the locale of English Denmark, but please Power Query, could you just please look at this Excel workbook as it is in Danish Denmark, even though I have different locale settings. And now this just works. And that is also working if you're trying to grab some data from the web, most likely American format or something like that, or it just receives files, anything from other departments from other countries. Using the locale is really something I wished I knew early on, because I've been doing many stupid things before this trick. All right. So moving on.
Yeah, all these things, but once you know them, and it makes common sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's like the web and the question mark. It's just why, and then I think I remember Guy in a Cube showing it, a few years back now, and you're like,
yeah.
So it's only common sense when you know it, and the locale as well. You just like,
exactly.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you.
And also, this is not for SQL people. I work with survey data, and the open answers there can be so messy. And sometimes you need with some unstructured joins. And there is something called a fuzzy match, or using the Jaccard index. And I went to university in data mining, it was called then, we said this: if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. But doing merges with data and doing these joins, they expect 100% matches. Even though your brain can see there is a pattern there, it should be this. But if there's just a capital letter or something there or misspell, it's not an exact match. So let's try to add some data here. I'll just do it the quick way. Sorry about this, not good practice. But using the Excel connector, let's move in and find the sentiments. So imagine that we have some products and we have tried to use, there are some comments about these sentiments here. And we have a dim product. These are the products we have. And then we have the sentiments. Just a few products, sentiment, whether it's positive, negative, and then the comment here as well. So let's add this. And again, use first row as headers. Perfect. So doing a merge queries, I would like to have my product from my dimension table, you could say, just to illustrate how it would be if you were creating the relationship inside the semantic model and doing a matrix. So let's dive into the, why is it sentiment? Question mark. Okay, refresh. Okay, there we have it. So merge queries in product. And I would like to then use it. And we have a 4 of 31 rows from the first table. Perfect. Let's click the Apple Airport icon and expand. And now we have 4 that is 100 exact matches. But I would say that this something like that, that is most likely also what the customer meant about buying or mentioning this product. So what we could do then, instead of doing the merge queries, I'll click this small icon here. We have this option of use fuzzy matching to perform the merge. And already there I can see I have now 24 matches. And it is ignoring case and matching some combining text parts. And I would then say that I recommend setting this to 1, so you will not have multiple new rows, because they can return multiple matches depending on the threshold. And the threshold is actually set here to 0.8, where if I was setting this to 1 and ignoring the case and all these things, it would also be 4 again. But as the default one is 0.8, and just expanding this one to see, now I can actually use this fuzzy match for these. Again, for unstructured data sources, for survey, something like that. And I have been doing this by hand previously in one of my first jobs, going through thousands of open answers, trying to categorize these into a dimension. Now I could at least use this and then double check a quality issue afterwards as well. So I think that's a neat trick here as well. But performance-wise, this will hurt very badly if you have many rows. So first, do a normal left outer join, and then afterwards try to then use these fuzzy query matching as well.
Yeah, I did something like this in a previous role, but I used R. I taught myself R to do it.
Fair enough.
Because it's fun. It's but this, like you said, it can be very, very painful, can't it, in performance? And then it's all the stop words together, and you know you
exactly.
can. Yeah.
But using survey data, for example, you would never get that many big tables or rows with that. But still, there are just showcasing several options here and some of the pains that I have had myself.
Yeah. That's what causes us to learn, isn't it? You always think there must be a better way.
Exactly. And one of the next tips here is document as you develop, because who will ever read your documentation or find it or update it and all that. So I'll try to have my documentation as close to the code, so to increase the chance of people reading it and people updating it when the code changes here as well. And some of these things I'll not show, I'll have some slides to make it a bit more quick, is I know it's different names here, but just having all the tables here, yeah, you can have that, and it's great that they are views, but I would always prefer to have, for example, by type with fact, dimension, metadata organize, function, parameters, staging, or data profiling. You could also do it by source, that some is from Excel or from SharePoint or from this SQL database. Just use some folders, please, to organize yourself. That really helps a lot. It's really just a right click, create new group, and then you have it. And then when you're going to add a new fifth fact table, guess where that query will be? Most likely in the fact of query folder. And then also for the applied steps and properties and steps, always try to reduce these number of steps and try to mix. So we have change type 1, change type 2, change type 3, and the filtered rows at the end where we could do it in the first. And we can actually right click the steps and then rename it instead of add a conditional column 1, add a conditional column 2, add a conditional column 14 in a solution I have seen before. And we can also right click and then say properties to actually have this small info tooltip if you really love documentation and love to have more text. So there's something into this as well. A small thing I also find very relevant is actually you can right click the tables as well in properties and add a description field as well. And that will actually be there, not just in Power Query, but also when you hover over the table inside Power BI Desktop. And that semantic model is also part of Fabric and the one-lay catalog, where you'll also be able to see that description there online. So that is also a neat feature as well. Yeah, remove spaces in step names. Yeah, and I've seen recently Rick de Groot, author of this big, heavy Bible of Power Query, is doing some AI help with Power Query and doing awesome things. So of course, follow him for some best practices there as well.
Yeah, I'm nagging him to come and join us.
Yeah, that would be cool. I'll definitely attend. He's awesome.
You've got to nag him even more then, Sue. Come on, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one aspect I also love is, of course, the tablet editor, and both in the free version and in the paid version, we have best practice analyzer rules. And John Kursky added some regex rules for Power Query. So checking that you're following, adding comments for complicated steps, for example, merge, added conditional columns and something like that. So you can always have something validated that you're following the best practices also inside the Power Query steps. That's also neat. Then we have some Italian guys that I also do is fun about, and they are saying it's not DAX if it's not formatted. Is it not M if it's not formatted either then? Because we actually have sometimes 1 kilometer long lines, but we can actually use the Power Query formatter.com, where you can actually format in a more human readable way, I would say, even though that you will train your brain to actually read these long lines, where you can use the Power Query format editor. And of course, there is a script for that in Tablet Editor as well, if you would like to do that for all your partitions. And then, of course, the date table I had was very simple. Melissa Decourt, also a great author behind this book, made a great function. And there's a video and link to the script as well, where you have 47 columns in your date table, trying to have, sorry about that, where you have 47 columns with offset, all the different ISO year and weeks and something like that, to then be invoked into your Power Query. So you have something to be utilized and also make your DAX a bit easier when using these, for example, offset columns, which is also a great help. All right. So let's imagine we would like to take all this Power Query, and we just heard about data flows and Fabric data flows. Is it easy actually to just migrate from this local solution to something we could reuse of these data flows Gen 1, or even with Fabric? So let's dive into powerbi.com here. And I would then add a new item. and then go Dataflow Gen 1. And you can already see where this is headed. Let's create a Dataflow Gen 2 instead. No, let's create a Dataflow Gen 1 for now. So what we can actually do, if we'd like to migrate all this, define new tables. So this is just Dataflow. Yeah, it is Power Query. We can also see the Power Query name just in the top left corner here. Let's just add a blank query here. And next, I will not add anything here. I would like to introduce the modern UI of Power Query Online, which has been pushed and pushed to not be part of Power BI Desktop. And I really hope it will be soon, because I really love this modern UI. And I will tell you why as well. So I will actually just quickly do these query folders. This should be new group. And this should be, let's say, staging. And then we have system generated ones. Let's just take everything. I would normally use a fact and dimensions tables to be loaded into PBI. Perfect. So what I can do is actually select the query folders, copy, paste, and open up the service, copy, paste into here, and loading, voila. And now we're actually migrated from Power Query in desktop to now into Dataflows Gen 1. And look at this small neat thing I do love is actually the query folders. We have it right next to the tables, where normally you would have the facts and dimensions, where you actually can see this information here as well. And I think this is just really neat. And of course, the first thing, credentials required to connect to the source on my local PC here. So now I need the gateway to add this as a data source into the gateway. Oh, yeah. So we would need to change that. So let's imagine that I fix this inside Power BI Desktop. I could then say get data, data flows, and then I would then be able to connect to the workspaces of the tables that are almost similar to, I would say, tables or views in a SQL database. Now it's reside into the Power BI servers, so we can actually reuse and share these Power Query tables to other report developers here as well. And now we can see this 20 Power Query Dataflow and PBI Gen 1. And here I have these tables that I can then share and reuse across the organization if they are not familiar or able to do SQL. So, but let's do a Fabric instead. You could already see that they would like to push you to go for Dataflows Gen 2. And what's the difference? So let's go in and find out. And I have a solution here. So Dataflow Gen 2 Fabric, you need a Fabric capacity. But you could purchase an F2 or be lucky enough to still have a trial that keeps extending. And now I have this. So the main difference compared to Dataflows Gen 1 and Dataflows Gen 2 is actually something I'm so passionate about, is the output destination. So Dataflows Gen 1 and 2 both have this modern new UI, but the difference here is that I can actually say that some of these tables should actually be destined into a lakehouse in one workspace, and some of these tables should be destined to another lakehouse in another workspace, for example. So the small difference here is on the tables here, I have this add data destination, and I can then have a new destination on lakehouse, warehouse, even SQL database. Good luck having friends with SQL developers pushing our tables made in Power Query back to the SQL database, but cool option. Also now it's quite easy to create a SQL database yourself inside Fabric. And now they just added this SharePoint here as well. And I can also see the data destinations for general for all the tables. So depending on how you're going to add these as well. But I could say that some of these tables should be for some lakehouse and others not. And this is really a game changer, I would say, because Power Query is a self-service ETL tool. It has been great on extracting data from many different sources, great on transforming data. But the load part was always the weakest link, I would say, because you always need to use the table inside a Power BI desktop report, for example. But now the load part of the L is now that you can just move it back to a lakehouse or warehouse or whatever. And I really think that really opens something with collaborations as well, because I've seen many times that the self-service users are actually making awesome, impactful business reports as well, but not the best practices as if you ask the SQL developer. So sometimes if they could migrate these self-service solutions to a bit more enterprise manageable solution, we could have something like this as well. And as well, for example, with the error handling also that you mentioned a bit earlier on, Anthony, is I would like to have an error message if something failed. But you could decide on that, and that's fine. But I have seen someone working in finance, they would like to keep pushing the data out and then have a separate report as a controlling report to say you need to update the master data or the records here because there are some errors, but still need to push all the data that is working okay to be pushing out to the business. So again, it depends on the business here. But we have this customer, this main table. And the terrible thing here on the data flows online, we need to wait a bit longer for the preview of the tables. But we have 2 errors here on the birth date of these customer names. So this is not working and the entire thing would fail. But what we could do instead is actually making a reference to this one and saying remove all the errors. So keeping all the rows that is working and then push that out to the Power BI report. But at the same time, we need then to keep all the records here where we can then dive into creating a report with the errors that are on these rows. So now I have this set on keeping errors. And as you have a table with rows containing errors, what we can do is actually adding a custom column and then expand that so we can actually get the error message. I have screenshots on how to do that, but the output here is actually now I have removed the error and then expanded this metadata information on the data format error, the message, the detail, actually the value of that record, and some error code and something like that. And we could then say this should then be, as I already have here, this should be as an output destination to an error handling lakehouse, where actually I'm feeding all my different tables with errors into this lakehouse to the same table. And then I have some additional information on from what table and from what even model or report. So I can have one controlling report to say we have some errors on these columns or these tables in these models. Go and fix this in your ERP system or SharePoint or Excel data if you would like to have that as part of your main report. And that is much, much easier when we have these different output destinations. And let's just push into here. And just a credit to Risarat from Radicard. He showed this years ago. You can also see the screenshot of the a bit older Power BI tables and colors there. But here we actually have count of errors by different columns. So we can add metadata for that type of controlling, which is really cool. So let's do something for the last minutes here. So what I would like to talk about is query folding. And I already did mention that. if you are connecting to an Excel file, you are breaking the fold. You are not able to transform this Power Query language, the M, into a native query language in Excel. It doesn't exist. It needs to be like a relational database. I think it's a SQL database, OData even have it, and some others I can't recall. Where do you find this? And again, in the modern UI, we actually see this with the icon. And this red one, which actually say that next to the step, this step will be evaluated outside the data source, which is breaking the query fold. For this one, I have connected to a SQL database. If I click into, let's say, this one, I have this green lightning icon, which of course means different things, but this step will be evaluated by the data source, and the data source is my SQL database. And also, if I right click, I will then be able to see view data source, use data source query. And this is the SQL that it is being translated into, even though that we are in Power Query NM. This will most likely be ugly and not so performant SQL compared to a SQL developer who knows how to do it. But compared to what I can do, or the similar profile, this is a great help. So another thing as well, adding an index, for example, for a SQL database, that will break the fold, because it will not be able to translate that into a SQL function or statements. How can we see this? So now we have made a merge between two tables inside SQL. Now you can see I'm breaking the fold. This step will be evaluated outside the data source. So what I can do is actually view the query plan as well, which also only is feasible inside Dataflow Gen 1 and Dataflow Gen 2. And we're starting from the right, that we are connecting to this SQL database, which is remote, doing this native query. And then already now that we have something with buffering and streaming. Buffering and streaming actually means that you are doing something inside the Power Query engine. Remote is something that you are doing the query folding. Streaming is something that you do on the fly, which is something you would strive for if not working with native query with the remotes. But buffering, on the other hand, is a really expensive operation, because buffering means that you need the entire data, or at least a lot more data, to actually perform the step. For example, doing the count or condition of 5, take the last n. It needs to be doing a sort, which means it needs to take data into memory of the Power Query engine, which is definitely slow. So be careful about the buffering. Try to have everything as remote or query folding. But again, if you're not working with SQL and having Excel, try to do the streaming first and then the buffering at the end. And that is possible with the query plan here, which I really think is neat as well. Great. So how are we doing on time, Sue?
We're just before 7, but we started a bit late, so you got a few more minutes, David.
All right. One thing then.
Yeah, Razor Rad was that error handling. I was just looking to his books, because he had 6 books you could download, but they seem to, I think he's pulled them all. Can't find it on the website, but I'll keep looking. Go.
Okay. One thing as well is something really difficult to do in a standard Power Query self-service solution is snapshots. And again, with the Fabric Dataflows Gen 2, we can actually now have snapshots. So we can not just replace, which will be the default behavior, we can actually append, which I think is so awesome. And again, append into the lakehouse, for example, or even SQL database. So now I have several, like a modified date and then a table, and then I have that appended. But again, you can quickly get a really large table, so be careful on how you append. So we can see here, choosing destination settings, you need to have the exact same schema, adding this modified date or table, and then instead of replace, you can then choose append. I think it's awesome. So again, with Fabric really opens up for some more advanced enterprise concepts for the self-service developers with just a few clicks. And that is awesome. All right. Sorry for the scroll. Sorry for the scroll. One thing here as well, orchestration pipeline. Oh my dear, I have tried to use Power Automate and many different things on how to run and schedule my data flows and then make sure that all have run successfully before updating my semantic model. Now with orchestration pipelines, a data pipeline in Fabric requires Fabric. We can orchestrate almost like Power Automate, where you can drag and drop. We should update this data flow, and then only after success, it should then refresh my semantic model and then notify me on Teams. If it fails, notify me in Teams as well, or whatever you might think. So this orchestration pipeline, again, would I go inside Azure Data Factory and try to do this? Oh my dear. Portal.azure.com is a nightmare for me. So having everything inside Fabric, which is my playground within Power BI, it is just awesome. So orchestration pipelines can invoke Dataflows Gen 2 as well. That's cool. So that's all the tricks. I wasn't able to have everything, but I have most of them covered in some of my LinkedIn blogs as well. Or else please feel free to reach out as well. And as maybe, should I prioritize or keep learning Power Query? Well, if you are able to do Python and SQL, just continue doing that. But for all the other, well, you can see that we can use it in Power Query and Excel and Power BI, and even now moving into Fabric. So definitely Power Query is here to stay, I would say. So just keep learning if you are on that journey. But just to say, whenever you can, data should be transformed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. So performance, reusability, it will always be better moving into SQL or using these notebooks. But again, if you don't have access to it or competency level or time to do it, well, there are other features that I've showed you how to do it as well. Great. Yeah. So these are all the credits and resources. I am just leaning on some other great guys and women. You can see all the links here as well. And if you think there could be something relevant for me as well, I have some newsletters and LinkedIn and a GitHub here as well. So yeah, thank you for your time and enjoy.
I like that, enjoy. Thank you. Thank you. That was brilliant. I think that, like you say, you know, it's Power Query just opens things up to people if they don't have access to SQL, or they don't you know, have access to Python. I mean, Python's great in Fabric, but you know, if you don't have Python within Fabric, it's, you know, lots of barriers to getting it set up. So there's been, as you can imagine from being in the chat, there's been lots and lots of talk back and forth in the chat about how to use APIs and paginating with APIs with Power Query.
APIs and Power Query were nightmare. Yeah. No, much easier. Yeah. But some brilliant tips learned, and I think everyone's, you know, picked something up from different things, and you know, also you forget different things, don't you? But yes, Pavel's saying Imka Feldman, she was brilliant. And lots of API and Power Query questions all the time on the forums. So a huge thank you, David. I get to see you seen at yes, she does seem to be hiding from the world. I haven't seen Imka for a while on different things, but she was brilliant. Any last questions for David?
Just to say thanks very much, David. Yeah, my camera's gone on the blink with Teams for some reason. Obviously, it's don't ask me why, but it has. So,
there's definitely something happening with Teams at the moment. So maybe it's not playing up. But yeah, that worked really well. Thank you so much, and thank you for all the posts that you put out on LinkedIn. it's been a huge source of information for everyone. I always look when I see yours and I think, oh, what's he done now, and have a read. So I find them particularly useful as well.
Great to
Fernando's being rude. Thanks, and let me go to my yoga class. I've got my bag.
He's never not rude, I must say. So
I'll stop recording now. Yeah, the recording stops.